On October 28, 1891, the city of Irkutsk solemnly celebrated the 25th anniversary of the marriage of the imperial couple. A solemn prayer service was served in the cathedral after the liturgy. The city was decorated with flags, and all day over the city sounded the bells. The town council in commemoration of this day decided to build a building for the town's 5th grade school. It was decided to locate the school on the corner of Bolisaya Street and Imorskaya Street, at the place of the former gymnasium for women. Here, at a meeting of the Duma, it was decided to name it the Alexander and Mary School. On this festive day, students of all the Irkutsk schools were excused from classes for 3 days. Preparatory work for the construction of the school building went on for a little over 2 years. This is the determination of basic data for the design, and the determination of sources of funding, and the drafting of an architect from Irkutsk, Virginia Rasushин, and many other works. After completing a set of preparatory work in early 1894, the contract for the construction of the Alexander Marinskaya College was taken by a merchant from Irkutsk, Diomid Vasilyevich Samsonov, for 53,900 rubles. February 20, 1894 began delivering building material, and immediately began excavating. Exactly 2 months later, the foundation stone was laid. The solemn prayer service was attended by the Governor-General A.D. Gremykin, Governor K.N. Svetlitsky, Mayor V.L. Sukachev, representatives of the provincial and municipal administrations, and a large gathering of people. The construction of the building was finished in 1895, and practically it was built in 1.5 years. Ready premises of Alexandro Marinsky College were consecrated on August 31, 1895. On November 10, 1902, in Alexandro Marinsky College 5-class library of the Teachers Society was opened. The White House is a stone building located in Irkutsk on Gagarin Boulevard. It is an architectural monument of federal importance. Originally it was built in the middle of the 19th century as a mansion of merchant Sibiryakovs. Merchant Sibiryakov Mansion, in the mid-19th century served as a residence of the Governor-Generals of Eastern Siberia, in particular, N.N. Muravyov-Amorsky, about what to the 200th anniversary of his birth, in 2009, was installed a plaque one. The building now houses the Irkutsk University. The building was commissioned by Mikhail Vasilyevich Sibiryakov in the Empire style. The architect is unknown, but presumably Giacomo Quarenghi. After his son Xenophon Mikhailovich died in 1825, his family lived in the building for a while, but in the 1830s the house was sold to the city. Since 1837 till 1917 the building was a residence of Governor-Generals of Eastern Siberia, and during that time there were 13 of them. During the revolution the Central Executive Committee of Soviets of Siberia was located there, but in 1918 the Irkutsk State University was located there. The theatre acquired the status of a professional theatre in 1850, when a touring troupe of actors stayed in Irkutsk for permanent work. The first performances were staged in the building of the City Noble Assembly too. In 1851, with the patronage of the Governor-General Nikolai Muravyov-Amorsky completed construction of a wooden building for the theater, which was solemnly opened on September 22, staging a play in one act by Nikolai Polivoy. Russian people remember good. 3. The provincial administration established a theater directorate, headed by a senior official on special assignments. A.N. Pokvesnev, a guards officer and playwright, whose plays were performed on the stages of Moscow and St. Petersburg. Iosif Markovich became the entrepreneur of the first acting troupe. 3. Famous masters of Russian theater scene came to Irkutsk on tour: Bravich, Dolmatov, Varlamov. Many times Pyotr Lenyov went on tour, and many times P.P. Gadabarov's mobile theater visited the city. In 1909 the company of actors of the Mali Theatre played. In 1915, the group of actors of the Theatre Korsh. Many times the Adelim brothers, Imdi Idalsky, Ermy Patipa toured the theatre. The Irkutsk stage is also associated with the names of Karamazov, M. G. Savina, V. F. Komisarzevskaya, Yablochkina, A. Iuthin. 4. On November 2, 1967, the Council of Ministers of the RSFSR decreed to give the theatre the name of the Soviet stage director N.P.O. Klopkov, whose theatrical work had begun on the Irkutsk stage. On August 31, 1999, by the order of the Minister of Culture of the Russian Federation, the theatre was given the honorary title academic. Since its founding in 1850, the theatre was located in wooden buildings, which often suffered from fires and natural decay. In 1897 the company moved to a stone building, built on a traditional tiered theatre scheme designed by the chief architect of the Imperial Theatre's Directorate, W. A. Schroeder. Financing of the works and the construction itself was held under the indefatigable control and patronage of the governor Alexander Geremykin. The new theatre impressed not only by rich decoration, but also by excellent acoustics of the auditorium. It was built in 3 years and has stood until nowadays, being rightfully considered a masterpiece of Russian architecture of the 19th century. You will never see another like it from the Urals to the Far East. From time to time the building was renewed and re-equipped, the outdated systems were replaced by new ones, kerosene lighting was replaced by electric, the roof was re-roofed several times and the pipes and plumbing were replaced. At the beginning of the 20th century the third floor was added to the side rooms around the auditorium, finishing and restoration works were performed in the auditorium, the stage rotation circle was electrified. But the building became more and more dilapidated every year, the foundations sagged, the wooden ceilings deformed, the systems and communications became hopelessly outdated, and the lack of office space was acutely felt. Monuments to V.I. Lenin. The first P. is in the park on the corner of Kmark Street and Proletarskaya Street. Its author, the USSR people's artist Esti Merkurov. In Irkutsk P appeared, apparently, in 1925 or 1926. But to attribute the sculpture was impossible because there were no accompanying documents. Only many years later, thanks to the architect P.G. Rakovic and local historian A.N. Granina, the author was identified. In 1934 the P, carved from a single piece of granite, was installed on a low pedestal in the same place where it is situated now. In 1985 the square was reconstructed and a new pedestal of grey granite was put under the sculpture on the stylobate, as a result of which the P was noticeably raised. Behind it, there is a flower garden. The sculpture is a bust of small size. Shapes of face, torso, detailed and softly modeled, which contrasts sharply with the surface, treated with rough chipping. Lenin is depicted in a moment of deep contemplation. Another P. Lenin was designed by sculptor N.V. Tomsky and architect L.G. Golyabovsky. The bronze sculpture was cast at the Mint in Leningrad. The author made the original of this sculpture in 1940 for Voronezh, and the author's repetition, for Leningrad, Vilnius, and Irkutsk. The sculpture on a square granite pedestal is installed in the center. The sculpture is situated in the center of the city, clearly seen from the nearby streets, and is located on the long axis of the square. A wide granite staircase connects the sidewalk of the street and the bulk part of the square around the monument. Lenin is depicted as he is making a speech. A convincing and accurate portrait is organically combined with a broad figurative generalization. The sculpture is distinguished by a clear, plastic and expressive silhouette. The monument was installed in 1952. November 6, 1959 on the left bank of the Irkutsk Reservoir, at the beginning of the dam, near the management of hydroelectric power plants, was opened another monument to Lenin. To V.I. Lenin. The authors, Moscow sculptor P.P. Yatsenko, architects Y.M. Mushinsky and M.I. Frog, pedestal architect T.N. Efimov. At the corner of the main streets of the city, Marx and Lenin, is a building that attracts attention with its complex shapes and sophistication of decoration. It was built especially for the Irkutsk branch of the Russo-Asian Bank, one of the largest private banks in Russia. The bank itself was created in 1910 by the merger of the Northern and the Russian-Chinese banks. Its head office was in St. Petersburg, and numerous branches were located throughout the country and abroad. The ceremonial laying of the building of Irkutsk branch took place on May 16, 1910, and in 1912 the construction work was fully completed. The project in the contemporary Art Nouveau style was designed by V.I. Kolyanovsky, an Irkutsk civil engineer. After the revolution in 1917, when the bank ceased to exist, the new government used the building for its purposes. At the end of 1917, beginning of 1918 the Provincial Military Revolutionary Committee was situated there. In November 1919 the government of Alexander Kolchak held a meeting there, and in 1920s the Provincial Committee and the Provincial Executive Committee were situated there. From the balcony of the building Chairman Vrcaa Shuryamov welcomed the Fifth Army, which entered Irkutsk. Since 1930 and up to the present time the building is used as a district clinic. Naturally, for the large dynamically developing bank it was necessary not only to have a representative and solid building testifying its reliability and stability, but also something out of the ordinary. Kolyanovsky's project met all these requirements. The unusual shapes of the domes, the complexity of the volume, accentuated asymmetry, strict and exquisite decor, all these distinguished the building in the city buildings. The choice of the site, in the very center at the intersection of two streets, was also no coincidence. The asymmetrical two-story building with a complex three-dimensional structure is as though composed of several grouped volumes lining the southern extremity of the narrow block. The overall composition, subtly combining general asymmetry with strict symmetry of each of the volumes, masterfully balanced and perceived as both picturesque and static. Taller corner towers topped with differently shaped domes stand out in the overall volume. At the same time the tower facing the crossing of the streets is especially emphasized, more magnificent decorations and more complex forms are concentrated here. And this is no coincidence. The first floor contains the front entrances, the second floor is one of the halls. The volume on Karl Marx Street, the upper floor of which originally housed the main cashier's room, is also actively highlighted. On October 28, 1891, the city of Irkutsk solemnly celebrated the 25th anniversary of the marriage of the imperial couple. A solemn prayer service was served in the cathedral after the liturgy. The city was decorated with flags, and all day over the city sounded the bells. The town council in commemoration of this day decided to build a building for the town's 5th grade school. It was decided to locate the school on the corner of Bolisaya Street and Imorskaya Street, at the place of the former gymnasium for women. Here, at a meeting of the Duma, it was decided to name it the Alexander and Mary School. On this festive day, students of all the Irkutsk schools were excused from classes for 3 days. Preparatory work for the construction of the school building went on for a little over 2 years. This is the determination of basic data for the design, and the determination of sources of funding, and the drafting of an architect from Irkutsk, Virginia Rasushин, and many other works. After completing a set of preparatory work in early 1894, the contract for the construction of the Alexander Marinskaya College was taken by a merchant from Irkutsk, Diomid Vasilyevich Samsonov, for 53,900 rubles. February 20, 1894 began delivering building material, and immediately began excavating. Exactly 2 months later, the foundation stone was laid. The solemn prayer service was attended by the Governor-General A.D. Gremykin, Governor K.N. Svetlitsky, Mayor V.L. Sukachev, representatives of the provincial and municipal administrations, and a large gathering of people. The construction of the building was finished in 1895, and practically it was built in 1.5 years. Ready premises of Alexandro Marinsky College were consecrated on August 31, 1895. On November 10, 1902, in Alexandro Marinsky College 5-class library of the Teachers' Society was opened. The Church of St. Michael the Archangel Kharlampievsky, like the majority of Irkutsk temples, was originally wooden. It was built in 1738 with the donations of the town governor Yemelyan Yugov, a seafarer and merchant. Its lower side chapel in the name of Saints Harlampi was consecrated by Saint Innocent, Naranovich, on January 24, 1739. The upper chapel, according to the Chronicle of Vykrotov's Chronicle, it was built by Cossacks and on June 18, 1746 by Archimandrite Nathaniel, the governor of the Ascension Monastery. It was consecrated in the name of the Archistrategos Michael. In the same year, the parishioners began a subscription collection of funds for the construction of a stone church building. Almost 30 years later, in 1777, when the necessary amount was raised together with the capital of the merchant Yemelyan Yugov, which remained from the construction of the wooden church, and with 15,000 rubles donated by the merchant Basil Balakshin, the Irkutsk Archbishop Michael Maitkovich laid the foundation for the stone church building. Within a quarter of a century, from 1779 to 1806, the Kharlampievskaya church became a two-storied, five-altar church. On September 6, 1782, the lower altar in the name of the Archangel Michael was consecrated in a new stone building, so the whole church was called Archangelskaya. 2 years later, on August 23, 1784, the northern side chapel was consecrated in the name of Archangel Michael. During winter time these two churches were heated, for which up to 45 sazens of firewood were bought. The second floor was consecrated one by one 3 summer side altars, of the Holy Virgin Mary, August 22, 1787, of the Assumption of the Mother of God, August 15, 1790, and of Saint Innocenti of Irkutsk, 1806. In 1878 the abode of Saint Innocenti of Irkutsk was abolished and merged into one, the Women of Myrrh-bearers. The people often called Kharlampievsky Church c. Stately outside and beautiful inside, Kharlampievskaya Church was repaired and decorated at the expense of its parishioners and donors, among whom were members of the famous merchant dynasties of Kamenov, Trapeznikov, Sibiryakov, Portnov, whose merchant companies have organized a number of marine expeditions to Kamchatka, the Aleutian and Kuril Islands. The famous seafarer Gregory Shelikov was also a parishioner of the church. The church was built in the Russian style of maritime discoveries and was associated with the development of Russian America and the discoveries of Russian merchant shipmen. It blessed sailors leaving on maritime expeditions for the further exploration of Siberia and the Russian North. Not by chance, on March 5, 1904, in the church of Kharlampievsky in Irkutsk there was married a noble woman by birth, Sofia Fedorovna Amirova, and a 29-year-old Navy lieutenant, Alexander Vasilyevich Kolchak, who was returning from a polar expedition. Kolchak devoted about 5 years to studying the ice conditions in the Russian Arctic and collecting data for the future navigation of the Northern Sea route. An island in the Kara Sea and a cape would be named after Admiral Kolchak. Later the Soviet government would cancel the name of the discoverer. This beautiful mansion in the classical style was built for the students of the provincial male gymnasium. Later it housed a school of ensigns, a cartridge factory, and the East Siberian branch of the Academy of Sciences of the USSR. In the 1970s, the building was given to the Irkutsk Regional Art Museum. In the 1970s, the building was handed over to the Irkutsk Regional Art Museum and AVP Sukhachev. The grand opening of the main building took place 45 years ago, in 1975. The change of owners had no effect on the building's appearance. Today it keeps the exposition of the classic art in the same interiors as it was 100 years ago. The building was constructed in 1907, designed by the well-known Irkutsk architect V.A. Rasushin. It was supposed to be the administrative building of the provincial male gymnasium. The school was 100 years old at that time, so the new building was a good present for the anniversary. The gymnasium itself with living quarters and classrooms was located in the neighboring building of the Irkutsk Aviation Technical School. The new spacious enfilade building was intended for celebrations and receptions. There was an assembly hall, several classrooms, a teacher's room, the director's and the doctor's offices, and an archive. The classic style of the building is seen from the facade and is noticeable in the interior decoration, ancient porticos, stucco moldings, and arched windows. Up to now it has remained almost in its original form, and its educational purpose was preserved throughout its history. During the First World War, the men's gymnasium was disbanded, and the building was handed over to the military department, where they opened the second ensign school, says Elena Sverdlova Alexandrova, head of the Western European, Russian and Modern Art Department of the Museum of Art. The ensign school was closed in April 1918, and in its place courses for Red Army commanders were organized. In 1921 a provincial Sovpart school was opened in the building, which was later moved to Chita. In 1930, the place of the party school was taken by the Communist University, which prepared personnel for the city government and the press. And in 1932, when collectivization began and there was a need for personnel for the collective and state farms, the university was transformed into the higher communist agricultural school. We can say that before the Great Patriotic War there were always educational institutions in this building. During the war there was a cartridge factory here and in the neighboring aviation college, says Elena Mikhailovna. Many Irkutsk citizens worked there, including teenagers. Artists of older generation, when they come to our museum, often remember how they worked in these halls. This beautiful mansion in the classical style was built for the students of the provincial male gymnasium. Later it housed a school of ensigns, a cartridge factory, and the East Siberian branch of the Academy of Sciences of the USSR. In the 1970s, the building was given to the Irkutsk Regional Art Museum. In the 1970s, the building was handed over to the Irkutsk Regional Art Museum and AVP Sukhachev. The grand opening of the main building took place 45 years ago, in 1975. The change of owners had no effect on the building's appearance. Today it keeps the exposition of the classic art in the same interiors as it was 100 years ago. The building was constructed in 1907, designed by the well-known Irkutsk architect V.A. Rasushin. It was supposed to be the administrative building of the provincial male gymnasium. The school was 100 years old at that time, so the new building was a good present for the anniversary. The gymnasium itself with living quarters and classrooms was located in the neighboring building of the Irkutsk Aviation Technical School. The new spacious enfilade building was intended for celebrations and receptions. There was an assembly hall, several classrooms, a teacher's room, the director's and the doctor's offices, and an archive. The classic style of the building is seen from the facade and is noticeable in the interior decoration, ancient porticos, stucco moldings, and arched windows. Up to now it has remained almost in its original form, and its educational purpose was preserved throughout its history. During the First World War, the men's gymnasium was disbanded, and the building was handed over to the military department, where they opened the second ensign school, says Alina Sverdlova Alexandrova, head of the Western European, Russian and Modern Art Department of the Museum of Art. Construction of the Bazanovsky Educational Home began in 1881 and was completed in September 1883. Children whose parents were unable to support and educate them were admitted to the Bazanov Educational Home. In this orphanage, the secrecy of adoption was very originally ensured. In the opening of the gate, which overlooked Basninskaya Street, was made a large round hole, which inserted a retractable tray. A child was placed in this tray and pushed inside with the tray. Next to it was a handle of a bell, which had to be yanked. At this bell the attendants were strictly forbidden not to look out of the gate and not to try to peep, who put the child. According to the terms of the orphanage, all adopted children were given the name Bazanov. The boys at the orphanage received clerical education, perhaps because until 1876 there was a wooden building of the Irkutsk Clerical School for the children of clerical workers. And girls getting married were given a dowry. After 9 years in Bazanovka Educational Home and with the help of donations from I. Bazanov's heirs, a maternity department was organized, which was formally opened on October 7, 1893. Present at the opening ceremony were Governor-General A.D. Goremykin, Mayor V.P. Sukachev and physicians of the city. In conclusion, a light breakfast was offered to all. Such an institution did not exist anywhere else, neither in Russia nor abroad. It had everything necessary to create such an institution. Many very good things can be told about this house, about a great mass of rescued children and women who were in difficult conditions and became nurses. There was everything you needed: a bathhouse, a laundry in a separate wooden house where all the clothes for the nurses were washed by the laundresses, and the nurses washed the underwear of the children they were nursing. The house was perfectly clean. The nurses were not allowed to go out of the manor, or even just to stand and talk at the gate. This was done so as not to introduce any infection, especially during epidemics. They understood that very well, and there were no epidemics in the house during the entire 4.5 years. They fed us very well. Everything was fresh, of good quality, varied, 3 or sometimes 4 times a day. Jugs of bread kvass were available at all times. If the jug was empty, any nurse would take the jug and go to the cellar, where there were 2 huge wine barrels. While kvass was brewed and filled for one barrel, the other was used to drink from. Nurses drank a lot of kvass. It is quite understandable. If you have eaten well, you are thirsty. And kvass was wonderful. It was better than the good bread kvass of Rifstal, which produced beer, bread kvass, lemonade, and fruit waters. The monument is made of dark pink granite. The author, sculptor Mimura, Suzuka, Japan. The pedestal has a cast plate with inscriptions in Russian and Japanese, monument of Russian-Japanese ties. In tribute to Daikoku Yakodai and his compatriots, Suzuka, who left their mark on the history of Russian-Japanese relations, we erect this memorial monument on the majestic and beautiful Russian soil, as a testimony of friendship between the cities of Irkutsk and Suzuka, as a wish for peace between the peoples of both nations. 1994, August, Irkutsk, Suzuka. Established in 1994 on the initiative of Mr. Ibukinzi, mayor of Suzuka, Mie Prefecture, Japan, in honor of Japanese nationals Shinjo and Seiho, buried after 1792 in the Jerusalem cemetery. The Japanese fishing vessel Shinsemaru was wrecked near the Aleutian Islands in 1783. The captain Daikoku Yakodai and some of the crew, rescued by Russian sailors, lived in Irkutsk from 1789 to 1792, and then returned home, with the exception of the sailors Shinjo and Sudzo, who had converted to Christianity, who were baptized Nicholas Korotaijin and Fedor Sitnikov, respectively. The Japanese fishing vessel Shinsemaru was wrecked near the Aleutian Islands in 1783. The captain Daikoku Yakodai and some of the crew, rescued by Russian sailors, lived in Irkutsk from 1789 to 1792, and then returned home, with the exception of the sailors Shinjo and Sudzo, who had converted to Christianity, who were baptized Nicholas Korotaijin and Fedor Sitnikov, respectively. the well-known Irkutsk City Hall and City Duma building, 14 Lenina Street, in its external appearance today cannot be called particularly striking among other houses. The most interest of passers-by is attracted by the absurdity of unfinished masterpiece of architect Pavlov attached to its wall, which, we think, even in its final variant, judging by its design, would not give them an aesthetic pleasure. We believe that future researchers of the city will not have to puzzle over how this monster was built, which cannot be said about its neighbor, an old building with a complicated and confusing history. Sometimes studying the history of the construction of a house is like solving a difficult problem with many known and even more unknowns. This definition applies to the work on the Irkutsk City Duma building. We know that in the 1930s, it was enlarged by 2 stories according to the project by Kazimir Voitzkovich-Mittal, and before that, in 1892 to 1895 greatly rebuilt by Vladimir Alexandrovich Rasushin, as evidenced by the comparison of the appearance of the building with a photo image of the 1860s. That was the question, which we set ourselves, starting our study, and we also wanted to know when it was built and who owned it. And let it not seem strange to the reader, but we will begin the account of the history of the house from its middle. So, on October 25, 1876 Irkutsk Customs Office, which did not have its own building and occupied the manor, which belonged to the clergy, moved into the old building of the city government bought from the city public administration, which was situated on the Angara Quay. It was a 2-storied stone house, located at the present tea sugar factory. The town government itself moved into the house in Tikvinskaya Square, at the same place it is situated now. Plans of the city of earlier period give the following information. In the plan, made in 1868, at number 22 on the place of the current city council indicated the headquarters of the East Siberian Military District and its printing department. The plan of 1849 shows that at that time the premises in the manor were divided between the Treasury Chamber and the Department of the Troops, located in eastern Siberia, on the plan, numbers 30 and 29, respectively. The plan of the early 1830s reports the accommodation of the Governor-General in the building, and in 1829 both the Governor-General and the main administration of eastern Siberia were located here. But planographic material cannot carry all the information, and plans were not made every year, so the further story we will build on archival manuscripts. By the decision of Irkutsk City Administration on May 26, 2016, the location of Kirov Square is determined within the boundaries of Lenin Street, Sukh-Batar Street, Count Speransky Square, and Tikhvin Square. Count Speransky Square is located within the boundaries of Lenin Street, Sukh-Batar Street, and Kirov Square, in the alignment of Chkalov and Rabochaya Streets. Tikhvin Square is located near the Vosty Bugil Company building within the boundaries of Lenin and Sukh-Batar Streets, in the alignment of Zelyabova and Ganajava Streets. 1 The square is over 300 years old. It emerged just behind south wall of Irkutsk Kremlin about 1670 and was called Kremlin Square. Originally the area was swampy and it was gradually drained. After that the square almost immediately became a center of trade, fairs and entertainment for citizens and guests of Irkutsk. On the square were sold furs, timber, tea, and foreign goods. Here travelers stopped for a halt and equipped their expeditions. At the end of the 18th century the Kremlin was dismantled and the square was named Gostinodvorskaya, later, Tikhvinskaya, after the church, which stood on its south side. At the beginning of 19th century the square was moved to the inn, which had earlier been on the Angara bank on the eastern side of the Kremlin, and then on the western side. An ice rink was built there in winter. The square gradually grew, and by the end of the 19th century it got its size, as contemporaries are used to. The fire of 1879 also contributed to that. It destroyed all the square's constructions, including the tenement house. Churches and other buildings were saved by the citizens, while the ruined ones were not reconstructed. At that time the square had a unique architectural ensemble, consisting of religious and educational institutions, but it was almost completely destroyed by the Bolsheviks, who demolished more than half of all buildings within the square, including the oldest Tikhvin church and a huge cathedral, which could accommodate up to 5,000 believers. In 1961 in the center of the square a square with a fountain and benches was created, the neighboring territory and buildings were improved. In the 1970s, the construction of a new building for the city administration was started, which the residents of Irkutsk nicknamed the House on Legs. Its dismantling began in 2007 and continued almost until mid-2008. Today, the square hosts the main public events of Irkutsk, including folk festivals, military parades, and Shrovetide. In summer a fountain works here, and in winter the main city Christmas tree and an ice town of Baikal and Angarsk ice are installed. Among the citizens of the square is a place of rest, walks and meetings. In 2001, at the site of the former cathedral was installed chapel in memory of the past and in honor of the third millennium of Christianity in Russia. In 2007 Kirov Square was deeply reconstructed, new fences and paving slabs appeared, the greenery was almost completely replaced. Today the City Hall and City Council are located here. The rather strange in architecture mansion has a rich and unusual past. It has been rebuilt several times, burned down, joined to another building. The first 2 floors were added, and then the third and fourth were added, and the facade was remodeled. Today, when you look at the building, you can't even see the elements of the late 18th and early 19th century. But during the renovation in 1998, details of the basement and first floor were found. They tell about the age of the house and reveal layers of different phases of construction and alterations. But its history goes back almost 80 years before that. Research has shown that the house originally belonged to the merchant Peter Soldatov. The oldest archive record about Peter Soldatov's real estate, which we could find, dates back to 1790, says Alexei Goroshchenko, a senior researcher of Irkutsk City History Museum, historian. At that time Peter Yakovlevich had 4 houses, 3 in Spassky Parish and 1 in Voskresensky. The Spassky Parish belonged to the now defunct Spasskaya Church, and the Voskresensky Parish to the Lost Church that had been located on the site of the Vostsibugilo JSC building. Of all the merchants' houses, only 1 was stone, and it was this one that researchers mistook for the future building of the town council. However, archival documents show that by 1796, in addition to the stone building in Spassky Parish, Soldatov had a house in Voskresensky Parish and another stone house under construction. It is very likely that the date, 1796, can be taken as the beginning of construction of the mentioned building in Voskresensky Parish. In 1797 on the right side of Zamorskaya Street were listed the following houses: Stone Vasily Sitnikov, Stone Petr Soldatov, Stone Mikhail Ryazantsev, on the corner of modern streets of Russian and Lenin. The next across the street, on the opposite corner, Stone Peter Soldatov, on the right wing of the modern city administration building, explains the historian. It should be noted that these years were a time of prosperity for Soldatov. He owned several plots with stone and wooden outhouses. In 1806 the merchant asked the Duma to assess his masonry houses, which were mortgaged to different state places. 2 of them were in pledge of wine takeover, a form of taxation in drinking trade, in which the owner was engaged, and the third, purchased from the merchant Kondratov, in the order of public resort, the city institution in charge of schools, hospitals, hospices and orphanages. The thing is that the merchant bought up a number of neighboring plots of land. The inventory showed that the building at the corner of Rossiyskaya, Degtярevskaya, and Zamorskaya was 1 story with the length, according to Zamorskaya, of 19 sazens and the width of 5 sazens. Under it there were 2 cellars, one of which was not finished. The second house, also 1 story, was 43/4 long and 7 fathoms wide, 10.2 to 15 meters. In the first half of the 19th century, a wooden Church of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary was built in Irkutsk. Its parishioners were Poles exiled to Siberia after the November Uprising of 1830. This church burned down in 1879. At the site of the burnt temple in 1884 was built a new stone church, which has survived to this day. The project of the altar was performed by architect V.I. Kulokovsky V. With the final establishment of Soviet power in Irkutsk for the church and the Roman Catholic community came not the best of times. In 1938 the community was disbanded, worship services were finally stopped, and in the building of the church was housed East Siberian studio of newsreel. The building was not subjected to external destruction, although the inside was rebuilt beyond recognition. In 1974 to 1978 the restoration of the church was made upon the project of the architect G. A. Vyazunova. Their task was to restore the building to its original appearance, eliminating all the later modifications. There were plans to open a museum of the history of the Poles in Siberia in the church. However, later the authorities decided to locate the organ hall of Irkutsk Regional Philharmonic in the building. In 1978 to 1990 the Philharmonic Hall was opened in the reconstructed Catholic building with its intense concert and touring activity. In the volume of the apsis of the former church a concert organ with a design of a German company, at that time German Democratic Republic, Alexander Schuch, was installed. After the Catholic community in Irkutsk was reconstructed in 1991, there were attempts to return the church to the Catholics. When the decision to give the church building to the sole ownership of the Catholic parish was made, the representatives encountered a difficulty in combining some everyday functions of a musical concert institution and a church. Also the discrepancy of some aspects of the status of the church, which is considered to be a historical monument, and a rather small capacity of the Irkutsk church in comparison to the modern needs and objectives of the local Catholic community played a role. Therefore, with the mutual consent of the city authorities in Irkutsk and the Roman Catholic Authority, it was decided to build a big Roman Catholic Cathedral of Immaculate Heart of the Mother of God, Theotokos, in Glazkovo, on Griboyedov Street. After the Holy See established the Diocese of St. Joseph in Irkutsk, a new Catholic Cathedral of the Immaculate Heart of the Blessed Virgin Mary was built. The church currently belongs to the Irkutsk Philharmonic Society. The Catholic community of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary performs services in it every day after organ concerts. In the first decade of the Irkutsk Burg there was no real temple. In 1672, Cossacks with a boyar's son Ivan Maximov at the head and fellow villagers built the first wooden church in the name of the Saviour's image of our Lord Jesus Christ in the center of the wooden fortress. Tobolsk Metropolitan Kornily gave his blessing letter for building of Spassky Church in 1670. There are no exact data on architecture and decoration of Spassky wooden church found by experts so far. But in the inventory of Irkutsk in 1684 it is written, this church was two-story, cold and warm, the cold one at the top, in honor of the not made worthy image, the warm one at the bottom, in honor of Saint Nicholas. It was called the Cathedral Church. Under the porch around it there are 6 benches with 2 hagiographies, a new bell tower with a hip roof with transitions and under it 4 benches and a church barn. From the counting list of 1697 it is seen that on the bell tower there were clocks with a clock. In 1706, a stone church of the Saviour was laid in the southern wall of the prison with the blessing of the Metropolitan of Tobolsk Philotheus. The builder of the church was Moses Ivanovich Dolgik, a Moscow stoneworks apprentice who used to build churches in Tobolsk and Verkhoturya before coming to Irkutsk. Architecturally, the new Saviour's Church kept traditions of the old Russian village church, a 2-storied pier, crowned with 1 cupola, a 2-storied refectory from the west, and a semicircular apse from the east together gave an image of a ship church with a distinctive silhouette on the east-west axis. In 1710 the upper cold temple was consecrated in the name of the Saviour not made by hands. From the old wooden church to the new church transferred the banner with the image of the Saviour. Brought here a royal gift, an icon in an expensive chasuble, granted by Peter I. In 1713 the lower temple was consecrated in the name of Saint Nicholas of Myra. The first transformation of the church dates back to 1758, when a bell tower was attached to the refectory. The mechanism of the bell-ringing clock was kept on it till the beginning of the 20th century. In 1769, in the second tier of the belfry was arranged a church in the name of Saint Demetrius of Rostov. In 1770, when the population of Irkutsk increased significantly, it was decided to expand the Saviour's Church. In autumn of 1777 a stone annex was laid on the north side, in the lower floor in honor of the presentation of the Blessed Virgin Mary, was sanctified on November 21, 1778. In the upper floor in the name of the Abalotsk icon of the Mother of God, was sanctified on July 14, 1784. At the beginning of the 19th century the Church of the Saviour was painted not only inside but also outside. The painting on the facades of the building took quite a significant place and included not only the faces of saints, but also multi-figure composition, some subjects of which, and it should be emphasized, were directly inspired by the history of Irkutsk. The interior paintings, unfortunately, did not survive, while the exterior ones were restored. Saint Mitrofan the wonderworker of Voronezh is placed in the kino above the portal of the second tier of the quad tier. Saint Nicholas of Myra decorates the wall below the eaves of the quad tier, and on the wall of the apse the image of the Saviour not made by hands. All 3 images are on the southern facade. On the east facade on the whole free plane of the second tier from the apse roof to the catterfoil eaves is located the monumental picture including 3 scenes. On the left is the common iconographic subject of the entrance of the cross into the water, but it is given a local coloring here. The composition is believed to show the baptism of the Buryat population. The right side of the composition depicts the rite of canonization of the local favorite, the first bishop of Irkutsk Innocent Yekolchitsky. The center depicts the ceremony of Christ's baptism. The painting was initially done in tempera, but later it was painted in oil colors. From 1829 onwards all Russian churches began to fill in annual clerical vouchers. They regularly recorded all the important changes and events in the life of the church. Thus, it is known precisely that in 1829 there were 82 households in the parish of the Church of the Saviour, more than a half of which were merchants and commoners. The total number of parishioners was 981 people. The monument is based on two main elements: the central stele on which the names of heroes of the Soviet Union, natives of the Irkutsk region are carved, and the eternal flame. The eternal flame is lit from the fire from the tomb of the unknown soldier near the Kremlin wall in Moscow. From the mass grave on the 40th km of the Leningrad Highway, where the defenders of Moscow are buried, from the sites of battles that took place in Smolensk and Leningrad regions, from the rocks of Sevastopol a capsule with the earth was delivered to Irkutsk. According to I. Kuznetsov, the number of heroes of the Soviet Union, natives of the Irkutsk region, who received the title during the Great Patriotic War, 68 people. Among them are representatives of all branches of the armed forces. Almost all districts of the region have their fellow countrymen in the list of heroes. On the stele along its entire length is inscribed, 1941. Dedicated to the Great Victory. 1945. There are also carved lines of the Irkutsk poet M. Sergeyev, dedicated to the heroism of Irkutsk residents on the front and in the rear. Near the Eternal Flame is the post of High School Students No. 1, Eternal Flame. Installed in May 1975. 4 schoolchildren, 2 boys and 2 girls, stand guard of honor, changing every 15 minutes. Among those who stood guard in the 1970s and 1980s, many adults, respected people, school principals, senior officers, business leaders. Solemn events are held at the memorial, rallies, demonstrations. In 1994 to 1995. Created the second part of the memorial, overlooking the Angara. It was architecturally designed by Giprodernia team with the participation of architect V.F. Buka. On the territory of the complex from Labor Square was transferred bust of twice hero of the Soviet Union, a native of the village Baklashi Irkutsk district, Army General A.P. Belaborodov, sculptor M. G. Motorfolov. The cathedral was founded in 1693. It is located behind the eastern wall of the Irkutsk Kremlin. In the 18th century, they were going to expand it, but they did not have time. During a fire on August 3, 1716, it completely burned down. 2 years later, it was decided to restore the cathedral from brick, but the royal decree of 1714 temporarily prohibited the construction of stone buildings. The construction of a new capital on the banks of the Neva River required too many costs, materials and craftsmen. In 1718, the decree was partially cancelled, and in the same year, after clearing the ashes, the Epiphany Cathedral was laid in Irkutsk, which was destined to become the third stone city building. It was built for 5 years. Donations for its construction were made by citizens and guests of Irkutsk, bringing money and jewelry too. 6 years after the construction was laid, the first building of the cathedral was opened, the Chapel of the Holy Apostles Peter and Paul Chapel. In 1727, when the Irkutsk diocese completely separated from the Tobolsk diocese, the construction of the cathedral continued, as evidenced by an entry from the parish and expense book of the temple. In 1727, contractors Pyotr Pakev, Prince Ivan Kirpishnikov, a Pozadsky man Ivan Kuryukin and a servant Ivan Popov delivered bricks, the first 30,000, the second 20,000 and the last 20,000, at 3 rubles per thousand. In the following 1728, Pavel Kushumov was paid for transporting bricks from factories to the place of construction for 50,000 and Fyodor Maximov for 40,000 for 24 kopecks per thousand. On December 3, 1730, the Pozadsky man Pyotr Pakev took it upon himself to make a contract at his factory for a church building 55,000 bricks of good for the terms by the 20th of July of the future 1731. 30,000, and the remaining 25,000 by the 15th of August. The prices ranged from each thousand to 2 rubles and a half. In case of non-delivery of bricks by the deadline, the contractor was obliged to make them twice. On the 12th of the same month, the Irkutsk serviceman Vasily Gilashev took it upon himself to deliver the same number of bricks in a row and on the same conditions. On December 23, on the same conditions, the Irkutsk serviceman, bricklayer Afanasy Kurnosov, took a contract for 12,000 bricks. On the 17th of January, 1731, a Pozadsky man, Semyon Efimov-Rakin, contracted to make 20,000 bricks of good red for the same price, for 2 rubles by Ilyin's day. 50 kop, per thousand. On the 20th of January, the Pozadsky people Ivan Mikhailov Maltsov and Leonty Danilov Urigin contracted for the same period and at the same price to deliver 10,000 bricks. On April 7, 1731, the aforementioned Pavel Kushumov contracted to carry bricks because of the palisade from the bricksheds of Pahev no longer for 24 kopecks, as before, but for 2 hryvnia per thousand. The last deadline was the 1st of October 1731-3. In 1729, the bell tower was completed, and on July 22, the chapel in the name of John the Warrior, which existed until 1818, was consecrated. In 1755 the construction of a stone fence around the temple was started. In the 1760s 3 more chapels were added to the 3 Pristolany Cathedral, in the name of the Kazan Mother of God on the south side, and on the north, in the name of John the Baptist and in the name of All Saints. 19th century. On the night of April 23 to 24, 1804, an earthquake occurred. As a result, the cross of the cathedral flew off and the 5th dome was damaged, which was later removed. In September 1812, ditches were dug for the 2nd cathedral bell tower. The bell itself was poured in 1797, it weighed more than 12 tons. It was the largest bell in the city, so it got the appropriate name, the Big One. Since 1797, it has been hanging on poles. On March 30, 1815, the bell was raised to a new bell tower in the style of Russian classicism, which on June 10 was finally covered with iron and crowned with a cross. The branch of the Irkutsk History Museum was established by the decree of the mayor of Irkutsk in 1999 and approved by the decision of the Irkutsk City Duma as a city exhibition center, which was named after the people's artist of Russia, honorary citizen of Irkutsk Vitaly Sergeyevich Rogol. The Irkutsk Duma approved the concept of the branch of the Irkutsk History Museum. It was supposed to reflect the artistic life of Irkutsk in its diversity in the halls of the second and third floors of the museum with exposition means, to organize exhibitions of Irkutsk artists, photographers, masters of decorative and applied arts, creative associations of the city, students of art schools, fellows of the mayor's office, non-professional artists, masters of folk art, to show art exhibitions from the twin cities of Irkutsk. According to the concept, a permanent exhibition of V.S. Rogol should be located in the hall on the ground floor of the center. Here, on the ground floor, there was also a room of the artist's working creative workshop, which, by the decree of the Kumi of the Irkutsk administration, was assigned to the artist Rogol for a lifetime free rent. The budget financing of the new cultural institution in Irkutsk was appointed from January 2000. The staff of employees was agreed and approved. Exhibition activities were supposed to be conducted by the head of the department. A branch, 2 researchers and an expositionist artist. The new museum stormed into the cultural life of the city. The first big exhibition was an exhibition of works by V.S. Rogol. At the request of the artist, his works from the funds of the Irkutsk Regional Art Museum and works that the artist presented to the city were exhibited at the exhibition. During the 5 years of the existence of the City Exhibition Center during the artist's lifetime, with his approval, under his curatorship, many exhibitions were held. The latter, prepared for his 89th birthday, was timed to coincide with the 65th anniversary of the events on the Khalkhin-Gol River. The exhibition featured paintings of the artist's Mongolian series. The opening was attended by the Consul of Mongolia, representatives of the Union of Artists, city, and regional administration. Greetings of Russian folk artists, academicians Ishkanov and Sidorov were read out. Exhibition activity is the basis of the work of the City Exhibition Center. In the first year of his activity, he worked out contacts with creative unions of the city, individual authors, looked for everything interesting, creative among non-professionals. Over the 5 years of the center's existence, more than 200 exhibitions have been held. Of these, it should be noted the work on exhibition projects, which is carried out purposefully. For example, since 2001, the City Exhibition Center, together with the Irkutsk Regional Art School, has been conducting a project called Stages of Creativity. The name is directly related to the exhibition area of the project. These are really the steps of the bay window staircase, and paintings of college students are placed on the walls of stairways, but this staircase leads up to the heights of creativity, and someday future established artists will be able to place their exhibitions in the halls of the Rogol Center. The project is educational and creative. It allows students to learn how to work with their own personal exhibition, make up its concept, select works for the exhibition, prepare an explication and label, and even direct the script of its opening. The project also provides employees of the center with opportunities to monitor the diversity of genres and techniques of young people and predict the artistic future of Irkutsk. On May 2, 1900 Im Feinberg applied for a building permit in his estate. His own statement does not specify what exactly he asked for permission for, and there is no plan. At the bottom of the statement sheet is written in blue pencil, "The plan is cut out." Taken in Tech Builds Department. We will learn about what the merchant wanted to build from the report of the technical table of the Irkutsk City Council. The City Council received an application from the First Guild of Merchants I Matveyevich Feinberg for permission to build stone shops, stone two-story services and a wooden two-story extension to the house on the land belonging to him on the second part at the corner of Medvednikovskaya and Talkuchaya streets. The following clarifying inscription was made on the project by the city architect: "There are no obstacles to the construction of a stone two-story house number 1, shops number 2 and 3, services number 4 and to the extension of the wooden part number 7 to the house number 6. 1. We pay attention to the most important places of the cited document. Firstly, Feinberg planned to build shops, which is quite logical, since the estate was located in a brisk place, next to a small bazaar, but these shops had to be connected with living quarters, given that it was also about the house. Probably, during the work, the owner decided to change the purpose of the object. This was due to the fact that at that time the construction of the Great Trans-Siberian Railway was in full swing, in particular, the Circumbaikal section of the road. Premises were needed to accommodate the construction management, and in this respect the Feinberg house was a suitable object. On July 30, 1902, Feinberg gave a subscription to the head of the construction department, Zimberg, for the delivery of the house. The subscription noted that Feinberg rents out a house, located on the corner of Talkuchaya and Medvednikovskaya streets and consisting of 4 apartments with kitchens and glaciers at each. In addition, rooms for coal in the yard, 1 shed and the entire backyard with rooms for a firewood warehouse and stables. Section 2. The rent is 6,000 rubles per year. Further in the document it was noted that the owner promised to rent out the house to finish no later than by October 1, 1902. 2. It turns out that the house is already losing the function of commercial and residential, shop plus apartments, and acquires another, fully residential. It should be noted that the concept of apartment at that time had the meaning of a living room in several rooms. The kitchen was considered separate. Also, residential premises meant any non-commercial premises in which apartments, offices, and institutions could be located. Secondly, there is a phrase in the cited document: the following inscription was made on the project by the city architect. The city architect at that time was A.I. Kuznetsov. According to the legislation of that time, if the author of the project was a city architect, then the city engineer had to consider and approve it. The document also states that the architect himself approved the project, which means that someone else developed it, and not A.I. Kuznetsov. Whoever the author of the project was, he had to solve a difficult design problem, which consisted in the fact that a large-scale building needed to be inscribed on a rather cramped territory of a plot having a sharp front corner and a 2-story wooden house on the right. The side of the building on Medvednikovskaya Street was only about 19 meters. The facade on Talkuchi Street has a length of about 55.7 meters, further to the border of the estate to form a gate on stone pillars, 5 meters, built into the blank wall of the outbuildings, 8 meters. A firewall wall was built along the northern boundary. Its broken line passes into the blind back wall of 2-story stone services, height 7 meters, length about 33 meters. On the left side of the estate, on Medvednikovskaya Street, 3, there were small outbuildings, a privy and a barn, then a blank wall of a 1-story stone house built by Feinberg in 1883 to 1884. There is an entrance gate between it and the wooden house 3. Thirdly, we draw attention to the text of the city architect that it was planned to erect a stone 2-story house number 1, shops number 2 and 3, services number 4 and extensions of the wooden part number 7 to house number 6. The phrase clearly lays out the purpose of buildings number 1, 2 and 3, although, looking at the facade, The structure can be considered a single whole. Judging by the plan of the building, it can be assumed that the residential part was to the left of the main entrance on Gusarova Street, wider relative to the rest of the volume. Probably, the named input should have been used for this particular part accordingly. Two years later, on September 26, 1881, the Irkutsk merchant of the First Guild, Alexander Fedorovich Vtorov, buys from his wife for 5,450 rubles in silver two places with a stone building and construction materials along Trapezhnikovskaya and Ivanovska streets, that is, a former estate with a stone house of the Chopalovs. A.F. Vtorov rebuilds the house. The reconstruction works were completed in 1897. Who was the author of the project is unknown. The Vtorovs were Moscow millionaire merchants who had trading houses in many provincial cities of Russia. Apparently, the project commissioned by the Vtorovs was executed by one of the Moscow architects. The building was made in the Neo-Russian style. Although the solution of the facades is close to the Empire style, risolites with X of the onion completion, vials over pilasters, Raskrapovka walls, rusticated pilasters on a number of strands, etc. The foundation and walls of the previous building were used in the new building. The main interior of the building is a two-light hall, divided into four parts by internal walls and communicating through wide arched openings. In addition, in the inner volume there was, along with other rooms, a swimming pool with mosaic baths. The rooms had rich chandeliers, grills and other decorations. In the unwritten public opinion, a perfect merchant is an enterprising, successful merchant who owns shops, factories, who is able not only to conduct business profitably, but is also widely known in the public field. He certainly sits in the City Duma, is a trustee of charitable, educational institutions. When a subscription is announced for any public needs, he is the first to put his rather round sum on the subscription list. If there is a theater in the city, the Perfect will certainly subscribe a box in it. If there is no theater, he initiates its creation. The house of the Perfect Merchant is known in the city not only for noble dinners. Either music lovers or lovers of fine literature gather here. In such a house there is certainly a multi-volume library, or even an art gallery. In a word, there must be some kind of cultural highlight. Moreover, not only the personal pride of the owner, but also the bright attraction of everything, a special place in the life of merchants was occupied by their own house. At the same time, For the owner, it was not just a dwelling, but also a symbol of wealth and even a measure of social status. Before the revolution, merchant mansions and shops, brick with strong walls or wooden, decorated with rich carvings, defined the appearance of the Siberian city, served as its decoration. A merchant's house was often both a dwelling, and a shop, and a store, and an office, as well as a warehouse of goods, a factory, a bank, a place for holidays. It is not surprising that merchant mansions were usually substantial, spacious, usually two-storied, with large windows, often with balconies or loggias on the second floor. A favorite house of a Siberian merchant is a two-story wooden house, on a stone basement, or combined. The first floor is stone, the second is wooden. The merchant himself and his family usually lived on the second floor. A shop, an office, a kitchen were located on the first floor. Distant relatives and servants lived. The building itself was usually covered with iron, richly decorated with wood carvings. The cost of the house of the Siberian merchant of the average hand was from 3 to 10,000 rubles, but, of course, there were richer houses. The impressions of Siberian cities described by one of the European travelers are also interesting. Western Siberia is perhaps the most populated, well-maintained and most civilized part of the country, but border cities, like Bisk, also have problems. On a rainy night, the city was a dreary place. Wet wooden walking paths, laid through layers of deep black swamp. Big wild dogs barked from the houses and tore their chains, while the travelers' feet felt the slippery boards laid over the precipices of the Siberian summer mud. Russian stoves were used for heating houses, and sometimes Dutch stoves with couches. The walls of the rooms were whitewashed with lime, sometimes covered with tapestries, wallpaper. The rich merchants, who imitated the lifestyle of the noble, had multi-room dwellings with a characteristic suite of staterooms. At the beginning of the 20th century there was a special merchant's masonry, for which red-shaped bricks were used, trying to make the facades of houses more noticeable, to distinguish them from the surrounding buildings. Metal openwork grills, consoles and parapets were widely used to decorate brick merchant mansions. Many Siberian cities of that time were characterized by whole estate complexes combining merchants' houses, retail shops and shops, various household structures, sheds, barns, warehouses and even power plants. Merchant buildings of this time, especially commercial buildings, are distinguished by their large size, rationality in the construction of volumes, plans, decor, which was largely due to the functional needs of buildings. Cities. Stone merchant houses and shops were built in many cities of Siberia. Merchant buildings formed a special structure forming the city's shopping areas, which are part of its city-wide center. The role of merchants in shaping the appearance of Siberian cities was expressed in the fact that many influential merchants gave their names and surnames to city streets and alleys. It should be noted that the guild merchant family did not necessarily live in the same manner. Some families had several houses and dachas. However, the houses and other real estate were divided and the father, as well as each of the sons, lived in their own houses, although they were listed in the same merchant family. The street originated in the 18th. It led from Bolshaya Street to the Arsenal, connecting two city bazaars, petty, retail, located on the site of the circus, and bread, now central. Warehouses, retail shops and shops were located along this street, which played a role in the fact that the street gradually received the status of a shopping street. The direction of the street towards the Arsenal is due to one of its former names, the First Arsenal. Later, the street was named Pestarevskaya after the merchant N.V. Pestarev, whose house was located on the corner of Bolshaya and Pestarevskaya, now Kmarks and Uritsky. The building burned down in a fire in 1879. In 1872, by the decision of the city authorities, the street was renamed Safayanovskaya, but the new name did not catch on. The street was badly damaged by a fire in 1879. In October 1881, the Irkutsk City Duma banned the construction of wooden buildings on the main streets of the city, Bolshaya, Tikvinskaya, Amur, Ivanovska and Pestarevskaya. Since that time, the construction of the street has become exclusively stone. On Pestarevskaya there were shops of famous Irkutsk merchants, Trapeznikovs, Brevnovs and others. On October 15, 1894, at the corner of Bolshaya and Pestarevskaya streets, Kmarks and Uritsky, N.V. Yakovlev's gun shop opened in Rodionov's house. In 1903, the construction of B.E.M. Yatsisov Passage was completed according to the project of architect A.I. Kuznetsov. Shopping malls connected Pestarevskaya and Kotelnikovskaya streets, Uritsky and Fourier. In 1906, the sale of cars began in N.V. Yakovlev's store. At the beginning of the 20th century, a pavement appeared on Pestarevskaya. Homeowners were engaged in its arrangement. In 1899, the music school of the free artist Aygenita Pilsudsky was opened in Poritov's house on Pestarevskaya Street, the first special musical educational institution in eastern Siberia. In 1905, the Women's Gymnasium of A.M. Grigorieva, now Uritsky Street, 9, was located in the house on Pestarevskaya Street. In 1906 Lebedev's printing house was opened on Pestarevskaya Street. In December 1906, Irkutsk Printing Association. On October 31, 1911, the first issue of the newspaper Irkutsk Word was published. The editorial office was located at number 15 Pestarevskaya Street. In May 1912, gendarmes searched the editorial office. Correspondents and employees found the addresses of the leaders of the RSDLP. The publication of the newspaper was discontinued. In June 1919, the Imperial Japanese Consulate opened in Irkutsk at number 4122 Pestarevskaya Street. It existed until 1920. On November 5, 1920, by the decision of the Executive Committee of the Irkutsk City Council of Workers and Red Army Deputies, Pestarevskaya Street was renamed Uritsky Street. In 1979, a memorial plaque with information about Ms. Uritsky was installed on the street. In September 2011, the board was destroyed by unknown persons. In 2009, the street was sold out with its historical name. In 2011, an architectural composition Magic Cello was installed on the street, dedicated to the musicians performing on the street. In December 1887, the City Duma banned the opening of drinking houses and the sale of strong drinks on several streets, which included Pestarevskaya. In May 1894, a quay was formed at the Bread Bazaar from the side of Pestarevskaya Street, a natural outlet of underground water to the Earth's surface. Part of the street, located in the lowlands, closer to the grain market, was flooded with water during the summer rains. From the Chronicle of N.S. Romanov, 1901, Navigation. On July 30, there was a big rain at night, and in the morning navigation was opened along Pestarevskaya Street. At 8 o'clock, Asaf, Ra, with a significant gathering of the public on the southwestern shore of the Pestarevsky Sea, a newly built vessel was launched against Avdanovich's store, a small raft made of planks of shipping boxes, with a mast and a flag hoisted on it. As a passenger on the ship sat a rat tied by the tail to the mast. The owner of the vessel is a local merchant from the Karmatsky shop. The policeman, badge number 59, was watching the order. In 1908, the Electric Theatre Mirage opened in the Irkutsk Passage. According to one of the pre-revolutionary projects, a city tram route was to pass along Pastorevskaya Street. The implementation of the project was prevented by the events of 1917. The Grand Hotel was built by architect A.I. Kuznetsov for the homeowner engineer I. Nikitin at the corner of Bolshaya and 6th Saudotskaya Streets, now K. Marx and Litvinov. The opening of the hotel took place on October 1, 1903. The wing of the building on K. Marx Street was occupied by a branch of the Russian Chinese Bank, until 1911, and then by the private gymnasium Gorziet. In the corner part of the house on the ground floor there was a Swiss shop of watches and jewelry by Prime Minister Kudryavtsev and a bookstore of the ID Sit-in Partnership. The hotel had a restaurant, a café Shantan Arcadia, a concert hall. The Grand Hotel stands out noticeably due to its well-developed and thoughtful layout, abundant decor made at a high artistic level, a complex pattern of window frames, a turret that completes the corner of the building. From the street, the building is perceived as a solid rectangular volume. The lavish decor includes an order system of flat pilasters, a developed cornice and interfloor divisions. The walls and individual pilasters are rusticated. The platbands have a complex pattern. Many stucco details are used in the decor. In 1904, the fireplace from the hotel was moved to the restored Volkonsky house. There was a billiard table at the hotel, where beer was served. The newspaper Siberia, number 60, 1910. Komsomol poet Joseph Utkin once served in this billiard room as a marker student. He was 13 years old at the time. In June 1907, participants of the first transcontinental Beijing-Paris automobile race stayed at the hotel. On January 27, 1918, a club of working youth opened in the premises of the Café Chantin Arcadia at the hotel. On February 10, 1918, a cheap dining room was opened in the hotel. On April 15 to 25, 1918, a Congress of former internationalist prisoners of war was held at the Grand Hotel, to which 60 delegates from 19 places in Siberia arrived. On July 20, 1918, a sports club was opened in the premises of the Café Chantin Arcadia at the hotel. On January 5, 1920, after the departure of the Kolchak government troops from Irkutsk, the Siberian and Irkutsk provincial committees of the RCP-B, and the central headquarters of the workers' and peasants' squads moved from the Znamensky suburb to the city and occupied the building of the Grand Hotel. On the same day, a meeting of the Irkutsk Gubcom of the RCP-B was held in the hotel premises. In March 1920, the hotel was the headquarters of the 30th Infantry Division of the 5th Army of the Red Army. On November 4, 1923, by the decree of the Irkutsk Gubernatorial Executive Committee, the hotel building was donated to Irkutsk University for the apartments of the teaching staff. On September 5, 1929, the building of the former Grand Hotel was given over to the First House of Soviets. In 1931, the Irkutsk Radio Committee began working in the building. the war. The appearance of Irkutsk has changed. It was not a military city, and now the streets were teeming with military men, people with Red Cross armbands, nurses, military doctors, naval officers, and even groups of ordinary sailors, whom Irkutsk had never seen, appeared on the streets. Almost from the very first days of the war, the housing crisis began to be felt. In many houses there were posts of soldiers. At one time, even the city school was converted into barracks. The Duma fought with the military department for schools, apartments, and against hospitals. In Irkutsk, a city with up to 70,000 inhabitants, there was no running water, no sewerage, no suitable premises. They wanted to arrange hospitals for 50,000 wounded, while creating an excellent source of infection. The Duma vigorously protested against the demands of the military department. The administration and doctors supported her, and the Moscow Vedomosti accused Irkutsk residents of cruelty and lack of patriotism. Thanks to the city Duma, instead of 50,000 wounded, only 4,000 or 5,000 were accommodated in the city, and then with difficulty. They wanted to take schools under hospitals, which the city administration managed to free from military post. After all, almost all schools in Irkutsk were created with private funds. The donor's will was to build a school, not a hospital. It was possible to change the will of the donor only by the highest command of the Tsar. But there was no such command. The Kaysky Dachas were taken away from the Irkutsk people under the soldiers. In the summer it was impossible to recognize the Kaysky mountain. The forest was cut down there, the area was polluted. New premises were demanded from the Duma, but there were none in the city. The military department began to accuse Irkutsk residents of almost treason. The housing issue was dealt with. It was more difficult to cope with transport. In an acute form, the question of food in the city and fuel arose. Irkutsk, lying among the forests, turned out to be without firewood. The Duma allowed citizens in urban areas to use dead wood and cut down dead wood. Regarding food, the city Duma wrote and telegraphed to St. Petersburg and with difficulty snatched a permit for several wagons with provisions there. Conductors of fast trains and wagons carried coffee, wine, sugar and the like for long distances and made good money. Speculation began, which the sanitary trains did not disdain. We had to send pushers, that is, people who traveled with freight trains and pushed our cars, that is, they gave bribes. Everything became more expensive, and in some things and objects there was an acute shortage. Special agents were on duty at the Kursk railway station in Moscow, who asked passengers whether they had luggage or not. If there was no luggage, they were asked to send the goods to Irkutsk on the passenger's ticket. Baggage was also restricted. By the end of the summer, an acute paper crisis was revealed. All newspapers in the capital of eastern Siberia and the official Irkutsk Provincial Gazette began to be printed on landscape paper. Only the private newspaper Eastern Outlook, due to the fact that at the beginning of the war its publisher and editor-in-chief Ivan Popov stocked up in Irkutsk with paper and managed to get a wagon from Finland, was printed on newsprint. On the basis of the crisis, robberies began in broad daylight, theft. The robberies reached such proportions that the Duma decided to petition the Governor-General to repeal the mandatory decree prohibiting the possession and carrying of weapons. Here's what Ivan Popov, the editor-in-chief of the newspaper Eastern Review, remembers about his New Year's adventures: "I walked around with a revolver and a Spanish glove in my pockets. One evening on Lugovaya Street, now Murat Street, not far from the police department, two guys came up to me and asked me to smoke. I was on the alert and hit one in the teeth with a Spanish glove, hit the other on the head with a revolver and ran away. I ran safely to the part. After me, these two began to rob a woman and were detained. Another time I was riding in a sleigh, and a noose flew over my and the coachman's heads, unsuccessfully thrown at us from an oncoming purse. I shot after the cat. Koshevnikov robbers have not been in Irkutsk for a long time." The city Duma raised the issue of organizing its own city police, but the governor protested this order, and the Duma members bypassed his protest by strengthening the staff of night guards. installing duty officers in carriages with horses in dangerous places. The house was first plotted in the plan of Irkutsk in 1868. In the future, it was completed and rebuilt. At various times, the building housed the hotels Russia, Siberia, Central, the Theatre New, the Cinema Modern and the Concert Hall Globe. In 1920, the headquarters and political department of the 5th Army I worked here, where prominent military leaders I.K. Gronov, A. Ya. Lapin, I.S. Konev, K.K. Rokossovsky, Sukhbatar, Ya. Gashik visited, N.M. Yaroslavsky, G.K. spoke at a meeting of the Irkutsk Committee of the RSDLP. Orjonikidze, G.I. Petrovsky. In 1934, the building was transferred to the permanent use of the Collective of the Theatre of Working Youth, TRAM, in 1937 reorganized into the Irkutsk Theatre of the Young Spectator. In 2006, the house was recognized as an emergency and has not been operated since. In the building on the ground floor there were shops, Sapphire, Jeans. In 2021, project documentation for the restoration of the building was developed, public discussion and historical and cultural expertise were passed. In 2022, Giller's house suffered from a severe fire that broke out on the evening of May 13. The fire spread from the neighboring unused building at the address Krasnoarmeyskaya Street, 4B. The fire area exceeded 1,000 square meters. Restoration of the building are planned. The earliest part of the building, facing Karl Marx Street, was built in the 1860s by A.E. Roskildayev as a residential house of merchant V.N. Bryantsov. The second stage of construction lasted from the 1880s to 1899s. Symmetrical one-story wings are attached to the existing building from both ends. The Bryantsov house and wing are being built, the Sibir Hotel, later the Rossiya Hotel, the Rossiya restaurant. By 1881, a two-story stone wing was being built behind the main house in the courtyard for the establishment of a hotel in it. In 1899, a stone gallery was being built to connect the hotel with the restaurant. The third stage of construction, reconstruction of the estate, dates back to 1902 to 1906. The building is being completed on the third floor. A two-story high wing has joined it on the right, which encircled the corner of the block and occupied the entire southwest side of the estate with a solid facade front, corner of K. Marx and Lenin Streets. From the northeastern end, a two-story volume with an attic is attached to it, which occupied the corner of the block at the intersection of K. Marx and Krasnoarmeyskaya Streets. Architect A.I. Kuznetsov. A new volume of variable stories is being added to the northeastern facade of the wing in the courtyard of the estate. The summer playground at the restaurant in the courtyard of the estate is being converted into a winter garden, covered with a glass dome. At the same time, the first works on the construction of a theater building in the courtyard of the estate began. The fourth stage of construction dates back to 1907. Chita entrepreneur I. Giller bought Bryantsov's estate and began rebuilding the building. In February 1907, the construction of the theater was completed, which officially received the name New, and unofficially, Giller Theater. An auditorium has been built on the site of the summer garden, connecting the previously erected high volume of the stage box and the wing of the central hotel building facing Amorskaya, Lenin, Street, where the theater lobby is located on the ground floor. On the side of the winter garden with a glass dome, a theater foyer is arranged. In June 1907, plumbing and heating were installed in the building, electric lighting was installed in the hotel, restaurant, and theater. In 1910, the Giller Theater came into the possession of A.M. Donatello. The Electro Theater Modern was arranged here. From September to November 1915, the Siberian Rifle Reserve Battalion was stationed in the building. The fifth stage of the building's construction dates back to 1926. The premises of the former Central Hotel were occupied by a trade union organization. This part of the building became known as the Palace of Labor. The theater part of the building was overhauled, and on August 26, the new cinema opened on the site of the theater. The theater room was decorated inside in the Egyptian style. The artist Hayavdovin supervised the design. The sixth stage of construction dates back to 1936 and 1950. The building underwent a complete reconstruction of the premises of the former Komsomolets Cinema, which was supposed to house the tram, theater of working youth. The stage and auditorium were re-equipped. The foyer and lobby were rebuilt, acoustics and lighting were improved. In August 1937, the theater was reorganized into Tyus. 1. The building had two halls, large, theater, and small, concert, and rooms for various events. The first public meeting was one of the centers of cultural and educational work among the population. The assembly had a charter and a board that directed all the work. In 1891, the Irkutsk public hosted a reception in honor of the heir to the throne, Tsarevich Nikolai Alexandrovich. At 11 o'clock in the evening, the sovereign heir Tsarevich honored with a visit the evening given in honor of His Highness by the city society in the public meeting room. Here His Highness was introduced to some of the ladies of the city who were honored by the conversation of His Imperial Highness. Having graciously accepted the dinner offered at 1 a.m., the sovereign heir Tsarevich left the public meeting at 3 a.m. with loud and friendly cheers from the masses of people crowding the streets of the city to the pier at the cathedral and deigned to board the steamer Speransky. Irkutsk Diocesan Gazette. The local symphony orchestra, amateur soloists, musicians performed concerts in the halls of the public assembly, and performances were staged. The stage remembers famous singers N.V. Plevitskaya, A.M. Davidov, L.V. Sobanov, ballet soloists Pinezhinsky, E. Jeltser, artists of the Adelin brothers, cellist B. Sikora and many others. The voices of prominent Russian poets F. Sologub and K. Balmont sounded from the stage. Children's parties, charity, costume and student evenings were also held in the halls of the first public meeting. It also happened that some drunken gentlemen made a mess in a public meeting and became the heroes of the newspaper column incident. On October 24, in the theater of the public assembly, an official of the military department made a mess in a drunken state and violated the correct course of the performance, for which he was immediately arrested by the officer on duty and taken to the guardhouse. According to the report of the present incident to the superiors of the named official, the latter ordered to subject the culprit to arrest in the guardhouse for a month.